who I am. My name's Lily. I'm the moderator for the panel, I hope. And I'm just going to talk really close to the microphone, like ASMR style. Um, I'm going to have our lovely panelists introduce themselves. Then we're going to go into the questions that I sent. And if you have any questions, then put them in the chat during the panel, and I will get back to them at the end. So, Rochelle, do you want to start with the intros?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us all. I'm Rochelle Hassan. I write middle grade and young adult fantasy. My work includes The Prince of Nowhere, Nox Winters and the Midnight Wolf, which is out later this year, and The Buried and the Bound, which is my young adult fantasy. It is about three teenagers who have to band together to defeat this evil creature that lurks in the woods and has been terrorizing their hometown.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa Bonin. I am the author of two fantasy novels, YA fantasy novels that were released in 2022, so Dauntless and Stolen City. And I'm also the author of an upcoming YA fantasy novel that will be released on March 25, 2025, called Lovely, Dark, and Deep. And today I'm really excited to be able to talk more about Lovely, Dark, and Deep with you. So this is a bit of a departure from my previous novels. It's set in our world instead of in a separate fantasy world. And it's about a magic school hidden in the Pacific Northwest. A Filipino-American teenager named Faith who returns to her magic school burdened with this idea that she left her best friend to die. But as it turns out, her best friend isn't actually dead. She's been taken over by something creepy in the forest that she and her new friends are going to have to figure out how to deal with.
That sounds really cool. I'm Leslie Vetter, YA and middle grade author and cat lover. My debut trilogy was The Bone Spindle, which is a gender-flipped Sleeping Beauty meets Indiana fantasy with both MF and sapphic love. And my middle grade series that's coming out is the Nightmare Before Christmas meets a magic school with tons of found family and fun nightmare creatures. And I love found family, so this is my favorite panel yet.
Man, all that sounds really awesome, guys. I am Rebecca Coffindaffer. I usually go by Becca or Bex. I am the author. I actually remembered this time. I almost never do. I am the author of the Crown Chasers duology, which consists of Crown Chasers and Thronebreakers. It is a YA space opera sort of race for the crown, Hunger Games thing. And next year I will be having another release. Let me find my words. A YA sort of a science fantasy called The Bloody and the Damned. It comes out spring 2025 from Rainbrook Press, and that is teleporting assassins and kind of a steampunk world and more found family, more queer found family. So we're just gonna we're gonna keep this one going. This is the trope. I like it.
That brings me to my first question, which is for people who may have not read your books. Can you introduce us to the found family in your books, and also why you gravitate towards found family? Rochelle, do you want to start? I think you're not mic'd. I think you're.
Yes, sorry. Yes, so the found family in my book, there's three POV characters. One of them is a hedge witch, one of them is a necromancer, one of them is not magical at all, but he was cursed to lose all of his memories of his true love. They're all kind of isolated and outcast in different ways. In some cases, self-inflicted, and some not. And so they kind of meet by mistake and wind up on this collision course with this evil creature. And at first, they don't necessarily all get along that well, but as happens in a found family, they manage to put aside their differences and come together. So what I like about this trope, I think, is that idea of people who are outcasts in some way, who are misfits and don't really belong anywhere, either finding or creating this sense of belonging with each other. I like that they're relationships that often aren't easily defined. Like sometimes I will see people try and make a found family dynamic fit into the framework of a nuclear family where it's like one person is the mom friend and one person is the dad friend, and those two people are like siblings. And that can be fun, but it's not what makes a found family dynamic interesting for me. I like that you can't easily put labels on these relationships sometimes. Like you can say they're friends or companions, but that's kind of like understating a relationship where people would like kill or die for each other. I like that they don't really have a reason to necessarily stay together. Like they're not bound by blood or adoption or marriage, but they make the choice to hold on to those bonds. And I think that element of choice is something that I find really compelling.
So the found family in my book, in Lovely, Dark, and Deep, are the Red Stripes. These are basically the sort of the outcasts of the school. These are the students who either broke enough school rules that the school is considering basically expelling them, or students whose magic is so out of control that the school doesn't think that they should be in with the remainder of the students. So that's where Faith ends up after what happens to her in the book, at the beginning of the book. And as Faith quickly learns, even though this class has like this reputation for being terrifying, most of the time they're just kids who have been either like put there because the school didn't know how to deal with their powers, or kids who really had good intentions and just for one reason or another couldn't really fit in with magical society. So it's this group of outcasts that really comes together to like take Faith in and help her deal with everything that's going on this year with her friend, and some realizations that she has about herself and all of these things. I've always really loved found family. I think that some of my favorite stories growing up had found family elements, and basically everything I've written has had that. And before this panel, I was really thinking about why that is, and I think it has to do with a lot of what Rochelle said, where it's this element of choice, right? Like these are people that you choose to be around, that you choose to treat as family, that you have these really strong bonds with. And these are people that I'm really fascinated by the idea that if one thing had gone differently, you wouldn't have ever met these people ever. But because of a shared set of circumstances, somehow your lives just end up really intertwined. And it's not, there can, I think, occasionally be romances, but most of the time it's not a romantic thing. It's, it's people coming together because of the sense of really intense friendship and love that I think is just really beautiful to write about.
I really love that from both Rochelle and Lisa. I love that idea that found family is our family of choice. And in the Bone Spindle, sort of the heart of my found family is these two kick-ass girl treasure hunters who end up totally thrown together. Same idea. They would do not even hit it off at first, and they become ride or die for each other. They're not a romantic pairing. They're these two people who find each other, and they're able to bring things out of each other, to drag things out of each other, like make each other better people, complete each other. And that found family grows. This is a world where all of the members, the sleeping prince and the wicked witch that we run into, don't belong for one reason or another, and they don't have a place to go back to, or they don't have a place they want to go back to. And so I think for me, a lot of found family is finding the place you belong in people, and not just in a place, and finding people who understand you and make that family. And so in the Bone Spindle, that's sort of the found family of magic users and misfits and people with no place to go. And they have a wolf who's definitely part of the family. He's like the best boy. Sindel's the best wolf boy ever. And I think one of the reasons I love found family is just that it's been so important to me in my life to have these non-romantic relationships too, and to show that there are so many ways to love people, and there's so many kinds of bonds out there, and they can make your life so rich. And I love reading about those kinds of families.
That's awesome, Leslie. I do think that that sense of understanding is key. Like, so in the Crown Chasers books, the found family for the main character, actually they start out as the competitors, but as you go through the book and through the series, like, you get flashbacks because they're all of the Crown Chaser competitors all kind of grew up together and had a unique perspective in that, like, they are sort of, they were all heirs to these very powerful families that sort of inflicted their will. And not only does that give them a sense, but also there isn't, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. What comes to be really important is the fact that not only do they have a unique understanding of each other, but they have a unique understanding of the world, and that they are picking up the pieces from generations of, like, war and bad decisions made by their parents and their parents' parents. And that kind of is a bonding, because they're coming from a different perspective. They're coming from a different generation. And there's not a replacement for that in sort of the usual blood family bonds. And I think that I don't know that I set out to write a found family with this one, but I found the most satisfaction as I went through writing Crown Chasers and finding opportunities for these guys to break down the walls. And, like, the most fun was writing them when they started bonding together. And I'm like, man, this is where the heart of this book is. It's not in them fighting against each other. It's in them coming together and recognizing that familiarity in one another. And these guys all said it better, but it's in the same kind of vein.
I want to ask as well about what you all think about the intersection of marginalized identities and found family. I think that a lot of marginalized identities talk about found family in a variety of ways, and so I'd love to hear from all of you.
Yeah, I think that I think people with marginalized identities, especially more than one marginalized identity, often have that experience of not fitting in, or environments where maybe one part of them is accepted but another part isn't. So you have to, like, pick and choose which pieces of you are acceptable in any given situation. And in a found family, the idea, I guess, is that you find a place to belong without needing to fit in the sense of compromising parts of yourself to conform to what's expected. Every person in a found family can be completely different from each other and probably not have much in common at all on the surface, but they learn from each other, and the overall group is stronger because of the unique perspectives that each of them brings to the table. And I think that's also kind of a hopeful view of, like, the kind of communities that you can build in your real life. So I think that that's part of the appeal.
Yeah, I've always sort of thought of my ideal found family as being this, like, place where every member of the found family can just be themselves, and not have to decide, which side of themselves is most appropriate for the situation, or which side of themselves is going to keep them safest in this situation. Just this place where everyone can just be who they are, and everyone accepts everybody for who they are, and that differences are accepted, and not used as not thrown in people's face or used as a way to exclude them. And I think that this is a really attractive idea for people with marginalized identities, because all too often, we have to go into situations and think, okay, which part of myself am I allowed to be today? And that can be so exhausting. And just this idea that you can find a group of people that you can just relax around. So, like, I'm autistic, and I'm masking basically every day. And the people that I'm closest to are the people who I can just be myself around. And that's something that I've tried to incorporate in all of my found families, because I mean, the friends that I'm closest to, I do think of as basically my family. And it's because of this. It's that I know that I can show any side of myself. and within reason, obviously, without like doing something bad to them or something like that, but I can be who I am, and that will be okay.
Yeah, I love that. I think found family can help you sort of find yourself sometimes too. To get a little personal, so I'm queer and ace and married to a woman, and that was like super confusing for me growing up. Like I had no idea, you know, who I was, what I wanted, what I didn't want, and figuring out your ace. That's asexual. In case anybody is listening who doesn't know that one, and sometimes figuring out a negative is very confusing. Like, what am I not? And I had wonderful friends in high school. I didn't want to besmirch them at all. But when I went to college, I fell in with this wonderful LGBT group of friends. And for the first time, I felt like I was understood. I felt like I was like getting this glimpse of all there was out there, and like all these possibilities, and that just sort of like opening up of what you can be and what you can see, and like all these wonderful people that I met. And so I think for me, found family and like that intersection is sometimes the chance to also have the people around who can help you find that courage in yourself, just like talk about things that you may not have felt someone else would understand before, and that can just be like a really wonderful connection.
Leslie, I'm also queer and ace. Hi. um, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much more I can add because I really think that um my fellow panelists did a great job at I want to bonk my microphone. Did a great job at like highlighting, I think, what draws so many people to found family, which is that even if you love the family you were born into, there are going to be maybe aspects of yourself that don't fit. As somebody who came into the queer community and their own queerness later in life, not until my 30s, that I understand how I fit into that. There are still things that you just kind of keep it in a box and you're like, that box just doesn't get opened. Um, and I think there's just such a long history of people going like, wow, I need to go find my community and my community is not fully here. And they go and they collect those friends who then become everything because you can just relax and just kind of know that you can use the labels that feel good to you, and you can use the terminology that feels good to you. You don't have to, in some cases, you don't have to code switch. You don't have to do all these things. You can just relax. And I think that that's appealing across the board, and why that the trope is so prevalent, especially in YA fiction, where that's often when teens are going out and being all like, I'm going to create a community for myself and I'm going to find my people.
By the way, if anyone has any questions that they want to, excuse me, if they have any questions that you would love to know, please drop them in the chat. I want to talk about The Buried and the Bound and Lovely, Dark and Deep, because both of your books put magic into a world that is closer to our world. And so I wanted to know from you both if you could talk about the opportunities that offers and what you took advantage in terms of a contemporary fantasy setting.
Yeah. So when you don't have to like do your world building completely from scratch, that gives you the opportunity to use what the readers already know and then build up your own lore off of that foundation. You can kind of play with what they do or don't expect. So for me, I use a lot of fae lore, and I can be pretty sure that most of my readers have some idea of what a fairy is and has probably heard a few fairy tales and read other fae like YA books. So I don't have to explain like the concept of fairyland from scratch. I just have to explain what fairyland means in this story. And because of the contemporary setting, I can bring in things that readers have familiarity with and use that to influence like their emotional response to certain story elements. So, for example, one of the very first scenes in The Buried and the Bound is Aziza capturing this dangerous fae creature that has hidden itself like under a Christmas tree at a holiday fair. So I can set up a scene or a setting that I know most of my readers will be familiar with, and will associate with like whimsy and holiday cheer, and then insert something more sinister. So without having to do a ton of world building right off the bat, I can impart a specific feeling onto the reader, using things they already understand. So that's been one of my favorite things about writing The Buried and the Bound is the idea that I can take things that are mundane, and weave magic into them and find creative ways that magic can be hidden in the real world, because that was something that I always loved as a reader, as a kid. I liked when stories made me feel like, magic could be anywhere in the world around me. And that's the feeling I try to give the reader.
Yeah, I actually didn't really set out to write a contemporary fantasy. I never thought I would do it, and I don't know if I'll do it again. But with Lovely, Dark, and Deep, I for sure knew I wanted to write a magic school story. I grew up with magic schools. I grew up with this wish that I would be whisked away to some fantastic locale to learn to harness incredible powers and just have all these adventures with my friends. And it's really hard to replicate that with a secondary world fantasy. And I did try a few times, but if you have a secondary world fantasy, unless it's like a portal fantasy or something, you're already in the fantastical world. So you can write about the adventures and you can write about the school and you can do all these things, but it was hard to imagine how you can get your reader to put themselves in the shoes of your characters to say, okay, I am this person in this part of the earth, and what if I woke up with magic one day and ended up in this location? So as soon as I knew, this is going to be a magic school story, I knew it was going to have to be set in a real place, which meant that I had to quickly learn how to write books set in a real place with, but then it became really fun because I could actually, like Rochelle said, I could use bits of my characters' backgrounds and not really have to explain to them. Like I could use modern day terms for identities and neurodiversities and things like that, and not have to try and make it feel like a fantasy setting. I could decide what my characters' backgrounds were and place them in the real world, and just sort of have fun with that. Like I could think about how to have a mystery while also having the internet and technology. All of these real world things that ended up being really interesting for me because I was figuring out how do we mesh magic and the mystical with our very scientific and tech-filled world. It just became really fun. And so Lovely, Dark, and Deep, I did sort of cheat. They are away on a magic school in an island, so they are isolated from the real world. So I didn't have to figure out travel times or any of that. But I think that this realism mixed in with these magical elements helped me to tell a story in fewer words and still bring the connection to the reader, between the reader and the characters.
In both Crown Chasers and The Bone Spindle, you both have a lot of puzzles, quests, lore, legends, all of the above. I would love to know how you go about creating that, and if there were any elements that you wanted to use but couldn't use or like didn't make it or something like that.
I love that question because like the traps and the ruins and the riddles were some of the favorite part of those books to write for me. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I quickly sort of was contending with in my own book is I had this place that had all this magic, but I wanted a lot of these traps to be mechanical too. I was like, I don't want it to just be always a magic trap because that feels like too easy and the reader can't really solve that riddle if it was just about, digging deep or having the right magic. And so I made sure to come up with good, solid reasons that there were a bunch of mechanical traps that could like be set and like reset. Cause I was like, okay, the more grounded this feels, like the more it feels like these characters are like in a trap that has been waiting for them for 100 years, the more like we're gonna have good tension in this scene. And so, I mean, there was like a ton of little like diagramming things and like writing notes to myself on paper and being like, this doesn't work, and like looking up medieval traps and Roman traps and just like seeing like how did they make sand ever fall anywhere? You know, like is there's also hidden hollows in walls. This is very cool stuff, actually, very fun. And so I would say maybe the coolest thing I researched that didn't make it in was I also got to look at like codes and ciphers and stuff. And I found out that there was this awesome thing called a Skittily cipher. And it was essentially like a ribbon, basically, that would have words written on it. But it only made sense if you wound it around a cylinder of exactly the right size. And it was really awesome. And I looked at like videos of them and I was like, how would I ever describe this in writing if I didn't have like all these diagrams that it took me to understand this? So like that was for me to enjoy and like for some visual medium someday to figure out.
That sounds super fun and cool. I wish that my answer to this was going to be as cool as Leslie's. I don't know that it is. When I went about writing the challenges for Crown Chasers, it was more about the idea was that like the former emperor who had passed was going to set challenges that you would need to sort of like dig deep and look for skills that this person who was a decent man, despite being an emperor and an imperial, what did he need to, what would you need to dig deep and understand about ruling people? So like I was coming at it from like, oh, they need to understand like history, they'd need to understand their people, they'd need to understand this. So that was kind of my starting point, and then I just sort of tried to develop it backward from there. I didn't do a lot of research aside from the fact that I grew up watching Goonies. So like that was that was probably my research was like, well, I watched a lot of Goonies and Indiana Jones and National Treasure. So that's kind of where, but I would love to dive into this area again. Like this might not be my last like puzzle book because I think that they're amazing. They're so much fun.
So we have a question as well from the audience, which is, what's everybody's favorite scene in your book with your found family?
I'm going to jump and take this one first while people think, because it's right on the top of my head. Is that cool, everybody? Okay, because it has to do with research. So I told you about that wolf, right? Well, I was looking up how wolves greet each other as pack mates, and I found that they walk up to each other's faces and they lick them all the way and try to lick each other's teeth. So naturally, when Red's wolf meets Shane, her wonderful love interest, the sapphic love interest, and the found family future, she goes right up to her face to lick it all over and perhaps lick her teeth. And it's a really fun found family moment where everyone is at the fire trying to cook and like burning dinner. And it's just like maybe one of my favorite soft moments in the book where the entire family was together and meeting a wolf licking people.
Okay, I have well, mine is not in the Buried in the Bound, but is in the sequel, which is called The Summer Queen. There's a few chapters in the book where they basically have to take a magical road trip through fairyland. And those sections were some of my favorites to write for the found family content. They're like traveling through this treacherous place, but it's also, I don't know, it reminds me a lot of being a teenager. And some of their interactions and conversations there were some of the most fun to write. So that would probably be mine.
I think across all of my books, it's always going to be that moment where the main character just breaks down. And the found family is there for them. So in this book, Faith, she's new to this whole thing. She still doesn't fully trust everybody. She's got all of this baggage, and she decides she's going to deal with it on her own. And she does something really not smart. She keeps a secret from everybody what she's going to do, and she goes off on her own and inevitably gets into an immense amount of trouble and the found family comes to the rescue. It's dangerous. They're a bit angry at her. So they're like, why on earth did you do that? And she just loses it. And she's like, that's it. Everybody is going to hate me now because I cannot stop crying. And all of these things are happening. And the found family is always like, in this book, all of the red stripes are like, yeah, we're here for you. It's fine. Please don't do anything like that again, because we care about you and we want to make sure you're safe. And for me, those moments are always I want to say they hit me the deepest when I'm writing them, because I have always had this fear, I guess, that like when the mask cracks and you like show your friends what you're really feeling and you can't stop and everything just comes pouring out, that's the moment where, the friendship ends. And seeing and having my characters be that vulnerable, and then having their friends and they're being like, no, I mean, we're still here for you. We still care about you. I really always enjoy writing those moments.
Sorry, I was getting caught up, and I was listening to everybody else's answers, and I was like, wait, did I think of mine? I did. I am a big fan of writing dialogue. It's my favorite thing to write. And I actually really like writing big groups of people doing dialogue. I would say in Crown Chasers, gosh, it's probably like 3/4 of the way through the book, they come across a challenge where they literally, like, the best way to get through something is to like literally almost tie themselves and their ships together, and they have to work together. And it's, high intensity, and these kids have known each other their whole lives. So there was a lot of fun to write their sort of sibling like banter and jabbing at each other and like provoking each other in like the most fun ways. Like one of them's like, hey, you want to play this, while we're waiting, anybody want to play like their version of like truth or dare? And the main character has to be all like, we are not playing that because you guys have a history of taking it too far. So just writing that sort of like, we're just hanging out, we know each other, we know like flaws and positive things, and we get to like banter. It just love it. Love writing those scenes. Would do it all the time and never have a plot.
I would love to know what was the first found family you fell in love with, and also what was the most recent one that you may have read, seen, or not just only read.
First one, I don't know if this counts, but when I was a kid, I had like a major Scooby-Doo phase. Is Mystery Incorporated a found family? Like I don't remember my Scooby-Doo lore, but I have this like vague impression that they were estranged from their families and like lived in the van when they were on the road. So that's probably my first one. The most recent one, I'm watching an anime called Dungeon Meshi, or in English, it's Delicious in Dungeon. It's on Netflix. It's set in like a D&D style fantasy world where the protagonists are exploring this massive dungeon filled with monsters. But they're super, super broke. So to save money, instead of bringing food, they decide that they're just going to eat the monsters that they kill. So it's like an adventure series / cooking show. And the found family dynamic is done extremely well.
Delicious in Dungeon is so good. I'm sorry to break like the rub. It's so good. Everybody go watch it.
My answer was also going to be Delicious in Dungeon. So yeah, Delicious in Dungeon is fantastic. Everybody should watch it. Go watch it. I guess this morning I watched an episode of My Hero Academia, which also does have a found family. It's the entirety of the class 1A. So what I actually enjoy is that somehow we managed to get 20 people into a found family, and it makes sense. So yeah, that would be the most recent one I've watched. My first one, I am really trying to think back here because I remember liking this for a long time. I guess you could count Ash and Pikachu as a found family, right? So that would probably be my very first one. I think I got into Pokemon when I was 7, and if I started liking If I watched something before this that put this in my head, I cannot remember it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, my first ones were probably the Tamora Pierce books. Librarian led me to those, and like talk about people who like don't belong or are searching for like friends or searching for family. Like, ah, man, I fell in love with those books. Like bonus, they're also the books that made me want to be an author. So little double there set the bar for me for girl heroes. And then I guess I'm gonna have to try Delicious in Dungeon. But recently I've been on a kick watching a bunch of the yokai anime, which like spoiler alert, a bunch make me cry, like Natsume Yujincho, which is like Natsume's Book of Friends, which are like soft, beautiful yokai stories where he meets and connects with yokai and his family and his friends. So those are my current love.
I think it's so interesting how much anime comes up with found family, and I don't think that that's like a coincidence. I think that's a staple. I think it's definitely a staple. So let me think. My first found family, honestly, probably the thing that like most adheres to found family is like I was a Buffy fan, right? And like that's a found family. I was huge into Buffy. I wanted to be Buffy, or maybe I just loved Sarah Michelle Gellar and thought she was beautiful, kind of both. And then but like before that, I also was a huge Star Trek Next Gen fan, and like they're kind of like co-workers, but they also kind of end up as found family. Like if you watch Picard now, yeah, I think Star Trek Next Gen is probably like very first. Recently, gosh, I think to give a different answer, I think probably the one that comes to mind quickest is I watched the whole series of The Expanse, and the crew of the Rocinante was a wonderful found family. A part that stands out is like I think it was season 5 where almost all of them were like sort of on their own little journey. And Amos, who's one of my favorites, who's like, yes, he's a monster, but he's our monster, which is another one of my favorite tropes, is like on his own journey. And at one point, realizes he doesn't really have a very strong conscience. So he's like, I've really lost my way. And he's like, man, I got to get back to my captain. I got to get back to my ship. And the fact that that was like a homing place for him, because you know that's how he knows, like that's how he knows he's being the best self, his best self. I don't know, something about that part I was like, oof, that hit me. I loved it.
Leslie, which one of the Tamara Pierce ones? Because I was also thinking that mine probably was the same, but for me, it's the ones where like everyone has the different magic. I don't remember what it's called, but like
the Circle of Magic, right?
Yeah.
With like Daja and Triss and Sandra. Like I'm gonna prove here that like no, those ones especially were like those 4 kids and then like their mentors later, and like it was not just them, but like that circle was like that set the bar for me.
I want to know from everyone who was the easiest and hardest characters to write in the found family.
For me, the easiest is usually Tristan. His emotions kind of jump off the page, and I find it easier to get into his head for that reason. The most difficult is probably Aziza, in that she's very guarded even within her own mind. Even to herself, she doesn't process her emotions as well, and she's more likely to push it all down and just kind of soldier on with this single-minded focus on whatever she's doing. So I guess it's not that she's like difficult to write, but more that I have to then do extra work to try and let the reader in on what she's feeling, because I do want them to feel that like same closeness to her and her experiences that they might have with Leo and Tristan.
The easiest for me was probably Faith. I mean, she's the main character. The entire book is from her point of view, in very intentionally, just because, I mean, I didn't set out to do it this way, but we ended up having somewhat similar backgrounds. So moving over from the Philippines at a young age, going to the States, like having to deal with immigration and stuff, very different reasons for immigrating. My extended family does not think I'm some kind of demon, but the same like feeling of um being separated from everything you know and having to navigate a new environment. Same like at the same age, the same feeling of like, hey, maybe I'm not as straight as I thought. And Faith is probably also a little autistic, which made it pretty easy for me to write her. Hardest character within the Found family for me, probably Yvonne, for being, so her magic is time. She can alter the time of objects, basically push things back in time, push things forward in time, which was a super cool concept for me when I thought about it. But then when I was trying to think about the mechanics of it and how it actually worked, and the like just trying to wrap my head around how I was going to integrate this into the book, it got pretty difficult.
Awesome. I think for me, my easiest character to write, even in the Found family, is Shane. So Shane is like this badass axe wielding lesbian warrior who has left her past in the past, and she's like the code hero of these books to me, because she is like kick first, ask questions later, get in losers, we're a family now. And so like I think this kind of courage, this kind of character who just like stomps in and everyone else is shaking in their boots, was so fun, and it is not me at all. And I think that's part of what made it so fun, just to like see this person unapologetically being themselves get to write that. And I think the most challenging one for me was her love interest, Red, is sort of the enemies to lovers. She's the witch who starts on the bad guy side. And because of that, I wanted to be true to her reasons for ending up over there. She, like many bad guys, has had, she got dealt a bad hand, and she did not end up over there on accident. And so I wanted to like really make sure that as she found this family and as they reached her, it felt really genuine. And so that was where like rewrites upon rewrites upon rewrites came in to make sure those emotions were coming through.
I mean, easiest was probably same as Elisa, the main character, Alyssa Farshot, mostly because I put a lot of my own self-deprecating sense of humor in there, and like constant sarcasm. And also, um Alyssa is a lot like me in how she talks, but not like me in how she like makes decisions, and that she is not risk averse. And if there is the most reckless, kind of stupidest decision to make, she's going to make that one, which was really fun because I get to play much like when I play D&D. It's like, is there a button? I'm going to push the button. Like everybody's like, should we investigate the button? No, we're going to just push it. We're going to see what happens. And that was kind of what was fun to write about her, and what made it sort of easy and flow. The more difficult one, it probably had to be Setter Roy, just because he was a character that was extremely reserved, very much a perfectionist, somebody who's extremely type A, like had a lot to prove, but it also made him kind of very closed off. And so finding ways to inject him into scenes and get a sense of him and who he is with all of these characters that are quippy and, kind of bold, I didn't want him to get lost in the shuffle with all of that. So that was probably the more challenging one.
Since all of your books are in the speculative fiction world, I wanted to know if you could also talk to us about how you use side characters to showcase different parts of the world or different things that the main character might not know about, and also how you construct side characters or characters in your Found family as a whole.
Yeah. So for me, there aren't really side characters in the Found family because I consider all three of them to be protagonists. They're all POV characters. They all have their own individual arc in each book, and they all play an important role in the climax. So I try to balance their storylines as much as possible to keep them all close to equal. I think about what to prioritize in the plot with that in mind. But each of them does deal with different elements of the world, mostly through the magical abilities that they either have or don't have. and the relationships that they have with characters outside of that core trio. One of them was born into this magical lineage and fully embraces it. One of them was kind of unwillingly dragged into it. And one of them is not magical at all, but has thrown himself into that world despite the risks because he's searching for somebody that he lost. So in this trilogy, the way I think about it is that book 1 is the monster book. That's what the external conflict is and what the antagonist is. Book 2 is the fairy book, and book 3 is the witch book. And while the protagonists are all facing this conflict together, they all have a different relationship with that conflict. And that lets me explore it in different ways and reveal different things about it.
I was writing a single point of view story, so the POV doesn't change in Lovely, Dark, and Deep. So when I was constructing the Red Stripe class, like I knew from the start the Red Stripes were going to be a found family. But I had to think about, how many characters I can reasonably write and portray from a single point of view without them getting mixed up, making sure that every single one has their own unique personality and their own role in the story. And so that ended up being 4. So there are 4 other members. I knew that I didn't want to have a group where every single person was with a different type of magic in a different year with a completely different identity. I didn't want to have 4 examples of completely different people because totally unique situations, because I thought, that's fun to show the breadth of the world, but how often do you wander into a situation in real life and be like, wow, we have absolutely nothing in common. Isn't it great that we're all a found family? So in this world, there's 3 branches of magic, and I ended up doubling up a few times. There's obviously 4 years in high school, and I doubled up a couple of times just to make it feel a little more realistic. And then I had to try and make everybody's personalities unique enough that they I can showcase them from someone else's eyes. But also I didn't want people to be stereotypes either. So it was a little bit of finagling to try and get everybody to be a unique character. And I wanted everyone to show different aspects of the world. So I had characters who'd been there a while. I had characters who were brand new to the whole magic thing. I had characters who felt more connected with the mundane world and characters who were more connected with the magical world. And I hope I ended up doing that okay.
Yeah, the Bone Spindle trilogy has 4 POVs in the end, sort of the main core members of the thing, but there's actually quite a few side characters, and I feel like some of them are part of the Ohana. And what I love about that is, and I'm sorry, I just used the Hawaiian word and that just popped out, but the found family, is that you have sort of a chance to see other aspects of the world from side characters' point of view. There's this figure known as the Paper Witch, and he's like this ageless, good-hearted vegetarian who lives in a dilapidated tower and would rescue everyone if he could. He takes in every misfit. He would help everyone on their journey, and so sort of through him we can see who some of the outcasts of this world are and who some of the people he has tried to help. And so he's like a mentor figure that can appear through these books, and certainly maybe not part of the core family, but he's part of their family. And I think through him you can see some of the magic. You can see some of mini adult eyes on the situation that has erupted in this world. And similarly, through the point of view of other witches, and I love that wolf, we just get to have this chance to expand the family a little bit into areas I might not have with just the main characters.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think all of those. I think when it comes to constructing side characters, and especially side characters that become part of the found family, there tends to be both. I find myself doing kind of 2 things with them. Obviously, they need to be fledged characters that have their own arcs and are not just there to serve the main character. And because in my case, Crown Chasers and The Bloody and the Damned are both like single POV, and very much about this one character's arc for the most part. They need to both have their own arcs and their own growth journeys, but also a lot of times to be foils to kind of foils to the main character themselves. So in Crown Chasers, you have Setter Roy, who is all about being like the perfect heir, who's all about being like, you know, doing what's right, sticking in between the lines. And then you have Faye, who is like basically the heir of the family that's like, yeah, we came up, we're the mafia, and now we're like new money part of it. So like she's like every one of Alyssa's worst impulses, that's Faye. And Faye gets to just be that and live that, and that's great. And then Setter's on the other side. In The Bloody and the Damned, I found myself doing sort of a similar thing in that you have different characters showing different perspectives of the world, and how that then impacts how the main character sees the world at the beginning versus the end. So in the beginning, you know, they might be a lot more cynical than the end when they're all like, no, I have big plans, you know, I see the dream or whatever. But yeah, so I think the challenge with side characters in a found family situation is like they need to be their own person, but also they need to sort of be a part of the scaffolding of these character arcs and the sort of the main arc of the story.
We have another audience question, and it is, what are you all working on next? I know some of you have already said like the next projects, but maybe if we could reiterate it.
Yeah, so I have two things I'm currently working on. One of them is the sequel to my middle grade fantasy that's out in September. The sequel will be out next year. And the other thing is book 3 in the Buried and the Bound trilogy, which is also due out next year. Though that one, we don't have a specific release date yet. So stay tuned.
I sort of have two things. So one of them, if everybody could please think really good thoughts, is a project that I love to bits that we are currently working on trying to find a home for. So fingers crossed that ends up somewhere where I can talk more about it and get super excited about it. But it's basically, it's based on, so I'm in Germany right now. And a few years ago, I took my mom to Neuschwanstein, which is that like fairy tale castle in the Alps. And as I was walking around there, I started thinking like, what if there was a fantasy setting where you had that castle, but it was also kind of night circusy? So there's a king who lives in that castle, and he has this magical court every night where they have revels and things like that. And obviously sinister secrets abound. And the protagonist is the court luminaire. Basically, her job is to bring magic and light and illusions to the setting. And I really enjoyed writing it. I really wanted to find a home. I'm also sort of putting together a next idea, and it's super unformed at this moment, but it is another magic school, but this time set in a fantasy world because I want to do something different with it. And there may be a climate change allegory there. So that's where I'm working.
Yes. So I said a little bit, but I have a middle grade coming out next year. And that has been really fun to work in the middle grade space and find my silly again, find my whimsical. And it's called The Labyrinth of Souls. And it has Ix Chatterfall as a main character who can see these nightmare creatures. And creating nightmare creatures may have been the most fun thing I've ever done. Maybe I never want to go back. I'll just write these books forever from now on, because they're all connected to our emotions. And I had so much fun with that. Like, the original idea was, a chill runs up your spine for no reason, or like you suddenly get hangry. What if there was like a little nightmare creature causing you to feel more intensely those emotions you were feeling? And so I also went on a journey and found all these lists of old words that are real, but we don't use anymore, like taradiddle and like snickersnee. And I was like, these are real words, and hornswoggle. And so I combined them, and we have like warty hornswoggles running around, and taradiddle turtles, and like monsters to the floor. So that's what I've been working on.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And I've got a couple of grade school aged kids who I think I'm going to need to get a copy of that. They often ask me, like, when you're going to write a book that we can read? Because my 9-year-old is like, why can't I read Crown Chasers yet? Is it just the cuss words? Because I hear you say those cuss words all the time. And I'm like, no, it's not just that. But yeah, so the next thing I already mentioned is The Bloody and the Damned, which comes out next year, which is about Valkyrie Brunn, who is an assassin who can teleport. And basically, they have always been able to teleport. They are non-binary. They are ace. So I got to put a lot of my own self-discovery into Valkyrie, and they do everything to provide for their two sisters. And then their sisters are kidnapped. And so then they have to go and they have to like reach out to old contacts and new betrayals and all that kind of stuff. So I'm very excited. This is a book that's been a long time in the making. Like I signed with my agent with an old draft of it back in 2016, and it found new life with Roaring Brook and my very amazing editor there. So I'm really excited to see how it finishes coming together. And then I'm also asking for good vibes because I have a potential adult fantasy, my foray into the adult market, that I'm hoping to also find a home for, which is my play on, I call it Jane Austen meets Penny Dreadful. And that it's kind of like, I love Jane Austen. I reread her books all the time. I love Regency. I don't write sexy enough for a Bridgerton comparison. Like I don't do I can't do spice. I love spice for other people, but I'm not good at it. Nobody wants me to write it. But I do like romance, and I like Regency, and I like weird, dark, like twisty magic. So that's kind of what I smooshed together for this, and hopefully I get to put it on the shelves for people someday. So we will see.
Yeah, well, we'll be crossing our fingers for both of these projects because they both sound really cool and I would love to read them. So, fingers crossed. Thank you, everyone, for chatting. Thank you for the questions that we've gotten. And thank you, of course, to the panelists for chatting about Found Family. I've left everyone's book links in the description box below. So definitely go and pick them up and also pre-order Elisa's book, which comes out next year. And I hope you all have a really great rest of your day, however much you have left of it in your whatever time zone you're in. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.